This week's blog post is the first in a series of three, which will show illustrations for Fiona Davis's The Magnolia Palace. As an art historian and a longtime New Yorker, I loved Fiona Davis's The Magnolia Palace, partly because when I read it, I could call to mind almost every image mentioned in the book. For those who aren't as familiar with the Frick collection or with outdoor sculptures in New York, this post provides some images. If you're curious to learn more, I've included links in the blog post on my website to blog posts on outdoor sculptures and also links to artworks on the Frick collection site. When an artwork is mentioned more than once in this series, I'll give you the reference back to where it was first mentioned and or give you a link to an image. Note that these posts have not been vetted by Fiona Davis or the Frick. To the best of my knowledge, the pictures that I've used are public domain. The quotes that I've used are short enough to count as fair use. The comments are mine and take them for what they're worth. I also wanted to mention that I have strong feelings about looking at images of artworks as still photos rather than in a video. When I upload these, there's no telling what YouTube is going to do to the resolution of them. I would go to Diane Durante Writer and look at the still photos, but if you prefer to absorb your information from video, I'm giving you that option. All right, starting with chapter 1. Davis mentions a sculptor named Rossi. I can't find anyone with that name who was working in New York City in the early 20th century. So we move on to August Luchmann, the Strauss Memorial, 1915. This is at West End, Broadway, and 106th Street, so the Upper West Side. This is one of my favorite outdoor sculptures in New York City. It honors a couple who died on the Titanic. I've given you a link to a blog post about that. I've also given you a link to a blog post on allegorical sculptures, the sort for which Audrey Munson usually posed. Next up, Isidore Conti, The Three Graces for the Astor Hotel. I found a plaster model in the Hudson River Museum in Yonkers. Conti actually helped co-found that museum. The Smithsonian's Index of Sculptures doesn't know where the original has gone. It may have been destroyed. Next, Adolf Weinman, Civic Fame, 1914, atop the municipal building at Chambers and Center Streets in Lower Manhattan. This 25-foot-tall sculpture is gilded copper on a steel frame. On the woman's right arm is a shield with the seal of New York City. In her right hand is a laurel wreath signifying fame. In her left hand is a crown with 5 turrets, one for each New York City borough. Given Civic Fame's placement high above the city, it's notoriously difficult to photograph, so I never did get around to doing a blog post about it, but you can look it up on Wikipedia. Moving on to chapter 2. On the left is Sherry Fry's pediment above the entrance of the Frick collection. Davis mentions a portrait of Margaret Frick, the young girl who died. I haven't been able to find one online, so none of that. Next up was the Fragonard room. It contains a series of paintings by Jean-Honoré Fragonard, which are collectively titled The Progress of Love. I've given you links to images of the room on the Frick's website and also to the Frick's list of paintings and furnishings in it, including chairs that are not to be sat upon. On the right side of this slide is one of the Progress of Love paintings, which is about 10 feet tall. Moving on to chapter 3. On Isidore Conti, see a couple minutes ago, The Three Graces. On the left of this slide are a couple Gibson girls. This is a distinctive type of woman made famous by illustrator Charles Dana Gibson, 1867 to 1944. On the right is a photo of one of the stars of the Ziegfeld Follies, which were lavish theatrical revues that ran on Broadway from 1907 to 1931 and sporadically into the 1950s. Just for contrast with the Frick Mansion, I've given you a picture of the Cornelius Vanderbilt II home, 5th Avenue at 57th Street. The Vanderbilt Mansion has long since been demolished. Bergdorf Goodman now occupies that site. But the huge wrought iron gate that you can see here was removed and put at the entrance to the Conservatory Garden in Central Park. Now we're in chapter 4. On the left is Renoir's La Promenade, which shows two little girls out for a walk. Dates to 1875 to 76. The Fragonard room is mentioned again, see a couple minutes ago. Also mentioned in chapter 4 is a bust of a woman by Daniel Farthington. Fiona Davis says that she made this piece up. That's Magnolia Palace, page 336. No sculptor named Farthington is listed in the Smithsonian's database or in Wikipedia. But the Frick does own Houdon's portrait bust of the Comtesse du Caila from 1777. Chapter 6. Someone mentions the boudoir on the side of the foyer with fanciful panels that remind them of those in the Fragonard room. Those are probably paintings by Boucher. I've given you an example on the left. Also mentioned is a massive portrait of Henry Clay Frick. I'm showing you one at the center that is over life size, but the Frick site gives its date as 1943, so can't be the one we're talking about in 1919. At the lower right is a smaller portrait of Frick, famed in silver. This one was acquired by the Frick in 1913. Moving on to chapter 7. The oversized Turner seascape is probably Turner's Harbor of Dieppe, 1825 to 26, which is more than 7 feet wide. And the Vermeer that's mentioned is Officer and Laughing Girl, which dates to around 1657. And here we have two works by Frederick MacMonnies, Beauty and Truth, 1920. These are in niches flanking the main entrance to New York Public Library's branch at Fifth Avenue between 42nd and 41st Streets. These allegorical figures are late and uninspired efforts by MacMonnies, whose earlier works include the Nathan Hale and City Hall Park. On MacMonnies, the trajectory of his career, see my book Artist Entrepreneurs, St. Gaudens, MacMonnies, and Parrish. On the left of this slide is Veronese's The Choice Between Virtue and Vice, circa 1565. I'm sorry the resolution is so poor. At the top right is a work by Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. Her most notable early work was this one, the Washington Heights Inwood War Memorial, 1921, at Broadway, St. Nicholas Avenue, and 168th Streets. Among Whitney's later works, the most famous is the Titanic Memorial in Washington, D.C. from 1931, whose pose was incorporated into the movie Titanic. In 1930, Whitney, 1875 to 1941, founded the Whitney Museum of American Art, which is devoted solely to 20th century American art. Its core collection was 500 pieces that the Metropolitan Museum had refused to accept as a gift. For the past several years, the Frick's temporary home has been on Madison Avenue in the Marcel Breuer building that housed the Whitney Museum from 1966 to 2014. And finally, for this week, Carl Bitter, the Pulitzer Fountain, also known as Pomona, from 1916. This is at 59th Street and 5th Avenue, just east of the Plaza Hotel. The fountain was constructed with a bequest from Joseph Pulitzer, who ran the sensationalist New York World. Pulitzer's battle for circulation with William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal helped bring about the Spanish-American War. Pomona was completed by Bitter's assistants, Carl Gruppe and Isidore Conti, after Bitter became one of the earliest automobile fatalities in New York City. Next week, we will look at illustrations for chapters 8 and 9. The blog post on Diane Durante Writer has a couple more links, for instance, 2 dozens of early photos of the Frick Mansion, and to the page where you can search the Frick's collections. DianeDuranteWriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the Sunday Recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. You can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.